Welcome and thank you for joining us today for our talk about how to create a blueprint for decommissioning legacy data platforms. I'm Ben Mincher and I'm a Client Relationship Director at Opencast Software. At Opencast, we work with clients across sectors such as government, health, and financial services, and we specialize in building and running the systems that they count on to deliver their core services. Today, you'll be hearing about a project we worked on with the NHS Business Services Authority to make improvements on their common drug reference. Before we get started, just a couple quick housekeeping points. We'll be answering the questions after the talk, so please feel free to post any questions you have for the speakers in the Q&A section during the talk. For any comments, please use the chat function. So let's get started. I'm very pleased to introduce our speakers, Fiona Hobbs, CTO at Opencast Software, and Kirste Worland, Head of Applications at NHS Business Services Authority. I believe Kirste is going to start by giving us an overview of the project. So over to you, Kirste.
Thanks, Ben. I'm going to start with talking about technical debt and why it happens, where we found ourselves with the Common Drug Reference product, which we will call CDR throughout. Just to take a step back about technical debt. Technical debt is accumulated in a number of ways, and sometimes over the years it's from a deliberate there's a deliberate reason for doing it, because either we want to do something quickly or because we're pushed for a deadline. Often developers will talk about the right way to do something and then the quick way to do something, and often we find ourselves in a situation where we're having to meet tight deadlines, and therefore we have to make some choices. Now, over the years, other things happen. You have what I refer to as technical debt rot. Now, that's really where you've had several different developers working on the product over a number of years that perhaps didn't understand the design in the first place, so they've made their own design choices to try and bolster additional functions and features on. And then you've got your accidental technical debt, which is more around your outdated design, your outdated code structures. And here we are with CDR, where we have a collision of all three different types of technical debt. And that makes a very, very complex system for us to then have to fix, have to run, have to support. And taking some decision points from there, we are looking at ways in which we can invest in removing some of that technical debt, but also invest in that future thinking picture. And when I think about technical debt, I often refer to my car, and to try and explain it to people. I bought a car back in 2007 and I had to get rid of it in 2019. Perfectly serviceable car. I put oil in, I had it serviced on an annual basis, but the cost of that over the years increased. And to the point where you have a decision to make where the cost of running of that car and the cost of fixing that car far outweighs the value that you're getting from the car. It's exactly the same with software products. So here we are, we were at the start of 2020, and we had some immediate concerns with the CDR product, which were around resilience, around code base. We had a significant erosion of corporate memory around how the product was created in the first place. And what we actually noticed was, when we did our assessment, was that there was three products that were kind of doing the same thing. And it occurred to us that over the years, these systems had become used as kind of satellite type systems, where the code, the original data was copied from one place. So that gave us an opportunity to consider what risks we wanted to address. So the first one was around the resilience. This is a really important engine for the whole of the NHS BSA, from understanding drugs and the component parts of them, the pricing, what they're served for. So ensuring that we have a resilient service is really, really critical. And then, considering where we are with accessibility and the tech stack, and making sure that all of the underlying components are future proofed is one of the next priorities that we had. So we made a start to remove some of those immediate risks, and we took a step back and looked at how we wanted to move this forward. And considering some of those access controls and bringing some disparate systems and reducing that product set. So we wanted to think about harmonizing some of those systems across the piece. Thinking back to what my vision was, I really wanted to be in a place where we could serve up the right information to the right group of people in a timely fashion. I didn't think that was unreasonable. I thought that was quite a serviceable thing to do. So basically what we did was we looked at making those decisions on what we knew. I'm quite comfortable at putting my head above the parapet and taking accountability of saying, here we are in the world today, here are the decisions that I'm going to make today. If another piece of information comes along afterwards and I need to make a different decision, I'm okay with that as well. So that was one of the guiding principles that we harnessed when we were doing the CDR work. And we also wanted to keep an eye on the future and thinking about that decision-making process, accepting that we're not in utopia. I'd love an all singing, all dancing replacement program product, but that's not where we're at. So what can we do to actually harness the very best of what we have already in our classic systems, along with the new and modern technology? I'd like to invite Fiona to come and talk with me about how we saw those future and some of the discussions that we had. Okay, so Fiona, we were thinking about the longevity of the product and the service, weren't we?
We were basically trying to tackle something which had organically grown for 20, maybe even 30 years. And actually, if we in our wisdom could build something that would last half that time, that would be amazing for me.
Yeah, and I think as we were saying, that erosion of corporate memory of how the product was grown, and it was really, really important that we had the ability to transfer knowledge back into the organization. So one of the guiding principles we had is we wanted to make sure it was a hybrid team, so that as people learn and develop and grow, they harness that knowledge within the organization, within the Business Services Authority, and really built on that capability. Fiona really helped about how we could protect the database, and I know she'll come on to a bit more detail about that, but it would be good for people to understand what your high-level thinking was on that, the database elements of it.
Yeah, so for me, the actual the value in this you can think of it as a product, is the actual data source. And we found ourselves in a space where we weren't able to control access to that data. So, well, that's not true. We did have access control into the data source, but we were unable to control how people were actually using that data source and why they were using it. And that has an implication on how you store the data and how you make the data performant, and all of those factors.
So we were looking to try and protect the quality of the information that was stored in the databases, weren't we? And what we'd observed is, for a number of reasons across the years, as people wanted to access the information that was held within CDR, but for different purposes, we were actually copying information out and then copying it back in to CDR. So actually, about protecting the database was really about having that one source of the truth, so that we could actually harness that and create links into the information, so that we were always protecting that initial database. Thinking about that, serving the information to the stakeholders. You Fiona, had some really great observations about the different types of stakeholders that we had outside of the Business Services Authority, didn't you?
Yeah, it's quite interesting. So if you think about what the CDR data source is, it's a store of all of the different drugs and medicinal devices that can be prescribed on the NHS throughout the whole of the UK. And if you think about who would want to potentially use that data and access it, it goes from like people within the BSA, the Business Services Authority, wanting to look at data around who's being prescribed what, where in the company, in the country, and what that means to GPs wanting to see what's the latest drugs that they can prescribe from the drug tariff, and then nurses as well, and dentists. And then you're looking at people in the Department of Health and Social Care who are looking at how you make sure that the price that you're paying for this drug is fair to people like the pharmaceuticals. And then you have the pharmaceutical companies who are really interested in what other drugs are out there that I'm competing with, and what's the baseline cost for all of that. And yeah, it's just that it's the audience for this data is immense.
So then we turned our attention to what success might look like, and what did we want to see a new system give us. And all of those really, really great words that you hear quite often, removal of bottlenecks, removing of manual intervention, efficiency of the service. It needed to be flexible, resilient. We needed to control, have that user control and control the data. One of the things that historically our classic systems perhaps haven't considered is that really great metrics. So how are we going to measure the productivity of the system, the efficiency of the system? So we wanted to make sure we had a really good eye to those really great metrics and the way that the information was served in a timely manner.
For me, it's providing a way to basically just to access the data, as we've said, in real time, but to actually be able to understand how to access that data. And then when you get the data back, be able to understand what that means, and not to have any kind of in-depth knowledge around the whole CDR inner workings. So for me, that was what success would look like. But then there were other things around, obviously the metrics around how long it took for data to go through the system and get into the outside world. I mean, we can see there we've got things around, we were sometimes looking at data that was up to 7 days out of date. So this is where the whole having data in a timely manner came from, because you should expect that. Our end users expect that.
And certainly in this day and age as well, where everything is very instant, reflecting on where CDR was previously to where it's moving to, we're actually making great strides just to bring ourselves up to date. We're, on that side of it, not even to actually push the boundaries, really. Now comes the really great bit for all of the techies. So this is definitely the techie bit. So over to Fiona for the real techie bit about where we decided to go and what was our strategy.
So Kirsty's already gave you an awesome introduction as to what we were actually dealing with. So I just wanted to get something down on paper, some boxes and lines for the technologists and the architects out there, so you could really get an understanding of what we were actually dealing with. So we have this central data store, the CDR database, which which still is an Oracle database. It's highly normalized. So for those of you who are out there, this allowed us for the last 20, 30 years to be able to store data in whatever fashion we needed to. So it's highly flexible because of that. But then that made it very hard to actually understand the innards of how this data related. So if you were building business models, business objects from the data source, you were looking at having to cross 7, 8, 9 different database tables just to make something that had some sense about it. So there's the first problem. The other problem with the database is, as I've already alluded to, there was lots of different stakeholders accessing the data source, and they were all doing their own different data queries. Not so much writing the data, but definitely querying the data and using the data for lots of different purposes. And like that was really hard to visualize. And I don't think we had a really good handle on that, but I'm pretty sure that there were things that we didn't know about as well, using that data. So the next thing that we had was the CDR application, which is where like initially we wanted to start. So this is the bit that had what Kirste thought of as the massive amounts of technical debt. So this was a desktop application. It had accessibility issues along with that, and there was lots of workarounds to go with that. And desktop applications are, nobody's really built them for the last 5-10 years, and this was a really old application, and so we really wanted to take that to be a web application and bring it into the cloud. So other parts of the estate, so we have different databases which pull data from that, so they're storing CDR data in their own data sources. And so for what Kirste mentioned before, that it was really hard to tell what the single source of truth was for things. We've got a series of extracts which were taken from this database, and these were taken on like a weekly or a nightly basis, and then different things used that. So the extracts are the bit for where we were serving up data, or we were giving data to people who were then serving it up, which could have been up to like 6.5-7 days out of date, which in this day and age we didn't feel was acceptable, and we wanted to change that. And then there were a whole host of other BSA applications, NHS applications, Department of Health and Social Care applications, which were all plugging into this database, doing different things, because it's so important to what we're trying to do. Being able to prescribe drugs and medicinal devices is so important to the NHS. So what did we decide to do? Where did we decide to go? What was going to be our underlying principles and a strategy for getting there? So we decided we were going to build an integration platform, so mostly API based, and we had some wishes, principles around what we wanted that to actually bring to the organization. So we wanted it to be responsive, so if it had to be able to give you results back within a timely manner. We wanted it to be resilient, so if it went down, it didn't mean that people like GPs didn't have access to that data and wouldn't be able to prescribe the latest drugs on the NHS drug tariff. We wanted it to be elastic, so it had to be highly scalable, because the traffic that was going to this data source was highly elastic. There was lots of peaks and lots of troughs to it, and it had to be able to deal with that. We also wanted to be able to control access to like individual attributes within the database. We wanted to have that kind of fine-grained access control to be able to say, okay, we have this user coming from this department, or from this particular product, or from outside the organization, and therefore they're allowed to see these sorts of things. And if you think about things like pricing, that can be quite commercially sensitive, so we had to have access to give access like on that kind of level to people. We also wanted to be able to do some complex validation. So a problem that we're having with the current system was that validation was occurring, but it wasn't extensive, it wasn't exhaustive, it wasn't the whole truth about what it meant for data to be valid in the system. And this is one of the reasons why we had extracts, was there was a cleanup process that went on, and then and then you could go forward and start building your extracts from that. So the idea was, if you were going to give data out to people in real time, you had to validate it in real time. And so that sounds quite easy, but there are a lot of business rules around individual attributes, and you talking about hundreds, maybe even thousands of attributes on this data source. And that is a bit of a monster to untangle and get right. So yeah, we were going to build this data integration platform, but we also wanted to move as much as we could to the cloud. So we had the idea that we were going to have this platforms spread over our cloud, but then our database CDR is in our on-premise data center, and that can't move because there are lots of things dependent on it now that can't move and flip easily over to starting to use this new API-led platform. So that has to stay, that has to be the source of truth, and that has to be kept up to date. So the idea was to build an integration platform which straddled our on-premise data centers, where we had our data store, and the cloud. And we wanted to go to cloud for the whole reason that everybody else wants to go to cloud, for the ease of having resilience, the whole benefits you get with having things which are hosted externally, and trying to use as many SaaS products as possible. So the idea was we'd have this API platform, and we were going to put a gateway in front of it, and to do some basic validation, because that's a nice place to put that there. But also that would handle all the authorization and authentication. So we wanted to be able to use it with the NHS's authorization store, which was Active Directory. And we also wanted to be able to identify different services coming in. So we were using things like API keys. And that's all a really good place to manage that in the gateway. And then we also wanted to do Audit. Who's looking at what data where? And so at that point, you can't capture why, but then you can start making inferences around why people are doing that.
So I think you're going to talk a bit about the user-centered design approach, aren't you?
Yeah. So for me, this was, so I've built API platforms for many years, and taking a user-centered design approach for me was an enlightening moment, and we didn't know whether it was going to work, and it actually turned out to be absolutely awesome. So building a user-centered design was something that came in from the NHS Technology Code of Practice and their API standards, which actually really follow quite closely the government digital services standards and their technology code of practice. It's kind of like it's a superset, so it's all the good stuff that's in government digital services, but then the NHS important things on top of that. And this was actually key in I think in being able to deliver something special. So the first principle in the technology code of practice is building something that that you understand the user needs. So as part of this, we carried out user research on the API endpoints, which sounds a bit of an anti-pattern at first, but actually it turned out absolutely awesome. And we didn't actually do anything different to how we would do user research with a front end. And so we used exactly the same techniques for gathering qualitative data. So, and I think we've got a better product because of that, because taking into account the user needs, when I'm talking about users, I mean, and developers here. So we did user research with the developers from the other products that were going to be consuming this platform, and I think it was a bit of a game changer, because it actually changed some of the data points that we had, and definitely some of the endpoints that we developed as well.
Just reflecting on some of those sessions with the user researcher, there was some very challenging questions asked of our user researcher by myself, and really was pushing around, have you considered this, have you considered that? So it was really great that we were able to work with our user researcher and actually really refine and target where they were looking at that research set, because actually what we've got back from that is a wealth of information that'll help us build moving forward. And I think because we narrowed down till we got where we needed to, the output from that was really, really useful.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it all flowed into, so like the technology code of practice also says that like the next thing on the list is actually make things accessible and inclusive. And because we'd done the user research, we ended up with a more inclusive language around describing what the business objects were, and how you got them out, and how you searched them and visualized them. And so it kind of removed the need to be in part of like a CDR in a circle that knew what all the different really domain specific language that was being used. That was all removed, and and it's a product that because we did user research with our end developers that didn't really know what the data source was, and some really so our support staff who have been in this database dealing with it for God knows how many years, and they know exactly what each of the bits and the quadrants and everything, what they called them, the language was. We ended up with a language that both sets of users were really, really happy with. So the consuming product developers were like, yep, we understand this. You don't really have to spend hours telling us what it is. We can just read your documentation and we can just get on with it. And then the support staff were like, well, we don't feel like we've lost anything. We don't feel like we've lost any data. We don't feel like we've lost any kind of nuance around what this means, because we've changed the language. So that was really important, and that was, I only think we were able to get to that point because we'd actually done user research on an API.
We started to where we finished has gone through that iterative cycle. We didn't get it right first time, let's face it. We have had to work with a whole host of people, and even when we think we understand people's needs and wants, sometimes when you play that back, you have to re-listen to what's being said. So and what you have to appreciate is some of our internal colleagues have amazing brains and have actually built up this wealth from the outside of using the system, built up this wealth of knowledge around what these codes mean, what they relate to, where to find it, how to get there quickly. And it's almost like an aesthetic use of the system rather than that kind of hard-based factual connection with the system. So they will go through that change curve, they will go through that grieving and loss, and we have to manage that as well on the hearts and minds perspective. And I think that's something that we will keep doing on an ongoing basis.
Yeah. So we did those two user sets as well, but we also thought about the very external users, and we actually did some user research with people from pharmaceutical companies around, because we had this API and platform and we want to use it internally, and that's all great, but then why would you not use it externally? Why would you not get, say, if you think about it, pharmaceutical companies have already got all this data in their own data sources, and you just want them to be able to click a button and it come down a chute and end up in your database. And API is the best way of doing that. So why wouldn't you want to open your API up to the rest of the world, really? Well, the UK. And that's where we had the vision of this going. So we're not there yet, but that's where this is going. So we've used a lot of open standards in there, so there's no surprises for like the tech people when they're looking at it. So not only is there a bit like a ubiquitous but more easily understood language for describing what the data is, but also we've used standard protocols for giving that data away. So we're using RESTful web services. We're returning JSON. It's all done over HTTPS. And we've even done things like standardizing date formatting and everything, which, in turn, it all helps with the accessibility of the data source. The other game changer for me was actually opening up the way we were able to search and contextualize those searches of the data. So as I mentioned before, we had a very highly normalized relational database, Oracle. So if you were searching for a product or an ID or something, then, like as I mentioned before, you have to cross multiple tables, and then to bring back related data, then you've got a kind of nested, exhausted thing to pull all of that back, and that's quite a involved process. And if you're trying to bring data back to end users so they can know something about a particular product in the data store, but then all the related stuff, it's really hard to do that with the relational data. So what we did was we put in Elasticsearch, and we brought that into the cloud, and that just enabled us to open up to a whole host of different ways we could sort and search this data. So I just really wanted to talk about a little story actually around this. So this was me, was like, yeah, champion, we've done there. So in the past, whenever our support staff had got a query in about a particular thing, they'd end up with an ID. So there's lots of IDs for things in the system because there's lots of things in that data source, and they were, in order to find what it was, it could be in maybe a dozen different places, and they would have to write a dozen queries which were spanning a dozen tables. And you imagine, it's just snowballing, it's getting out of control. So it would take them like half an hour, 2 hours to maybe find out what people were on the other end of the support line were talking about. And we were able to just take this ID and drop it into Elasticsearch, not say what it was, and then Elasticsearch would be able to bring us back all of the things that had that ID and the related things around it. And that is so powerful.
Yeah, so I mean, speed of being able to serve that information for us will be a massive efficiency, and people being able to get the information and do their jobs in an easier way for them, in a quicker way for them, means that they can be freed up to do more important stuff as well. We don't want our people having to spend several hours or an hour, or however long, trying to work something out. We should be able to present it to them in an easy and understandable way. So that for me is a real key thing that's important. And then how can we help those guys and move forward with what comes next? Because actually they're really great, knowledgeable people, and we want them to be able to share that knowledge in a wider context, which is great.
Lastly, I think the another important thing is that we really heavily leveraged the power of contract testing. So we used a tool called PACT for doing that. It's pretty industry standard, and that allowed us to standardize what our APIs and our endpoints and the data objects being returned. It allowed us to standardize what those were with all of our different stakeholders. And then from that, we were able to build some rapid stubs, which would behave as the real system would.
So how are we using this as a blueprint then? I think for me, the kind of takeaway for this is, we have to acknowledge that technology, it grows in layers. as things evolve and as things get added to, it's like layers of an onion, and it gets added to over a period of time. So one of the things that we want to keep close to our hearts is about looking at the standards and principles that we have for the organisation, for the NHS, for government, those open standards, and making sure that we really use them wisely within the development and the delivery. And sometimes the quick delivery option isn't always the right option. Sometimes we have to take a little bit of extra time to put some of the things in place. So although I talk about rapid delivery, I'm not talking about rapid delivery at a cost of quality. I'm talking about progressive and iterative delivery. So really taking some of those standards, and Fiona, really looked at those NHS technology code of practice and actually was really happy and comfortable with some of those standards and principles because they're good common sense standards and principles. And we're in a really fortunate position where we're starting to build up a really good set of common standards, common principles right across the organisation. Fiona, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, actually, so I'd say there were standards and principles. So we brought in a few new to this area of the organisation, some new tools and new technologies, and we were very keen to actually make it around not what that actual specific product or tool was doing, but around what we were trying to achieve from that. So when we brought in PACT, we were looking at actually contract-based testing is a really good thing if we're moving towards not microservices, but smaller, more targeted services that we identify through doing all of our amazing service design pieces. This is something that we have to do in order to maintain integrity between one service and another.
We've considered the integration platform as a strategy, and actually I'm quite excited about the fact that I'm having some really excellent conversations about integration platforms. What is our strategic approach? What's our tactical approach in the short term to get us up and running? What areas of the business can we start off first? And that's all as a result of the work that we did in CDR, because it's enabled me to actually test out if we had a different integration approach, how could we leverage it more? And I'm very, very fortunate to be working with an excellent enterprise architect within the Business Services Authority, Kath Corrigan, who is really helping to shape that space. So that's really given us the impetus to start looking at that properly. So I'm really excited about where we go with that. User groups in research is really important to me, and I know it's really important to Fiona as well. And I really welcomed the opportunity to research across a different subset of users as well. And that was music to my ears. So I'm going to let Fiona talk a bit more about that, because it was something I was passionate about, but she actually executed.
Yeah, so we've been talking about user research and user-centered design all the way through this talk, but yeah, so we all of the different users that we've identified. So we've got the GPs, and we've got the nurses and the pharmaceutical companies, and we did research with all of them. And then we've got our all internal staff as well, some of them which were very highly well versed in what the domain language was of what was then the current system, and then the other side, so the developers, because developers always get forgotten about, don't they? I don't think so. I've used many API over the years, and as a developer, so that is my background. I am technical. I write code, and so I've never, as a developer, been asked about whether I liked an API, and I've used some god awful APIs, and that for me was a really refreshing thing that we tried out. Just it made a big difference. You could see people were on board, and we found out things about our data source that we didn't know, which was great, at the same time. But it's just, it helped with the whole hearts and mind piece as well, because the developers are the people that are going to take that data and do something with it elsewhere in another product.
And for me, if I go back to that first picture, if I go back to the first picture around where it was on the technology on the technology curve, CDR, DM&D, and PPRS are all different products that are doing virtually the same thing. So what this actually gives us is an engine to then support the different lenses that people need to look at the information through, and that in itself gives us an excellent blueprint to apply to other services. We have a number of services that we will be looking at where, you know, we have 3 or 4 different applications which were well ahead of their time back in the day. Were very, very cleverly put together, and we know that we're very cleverly put together, because trying to replicate them now is a big enough challenge. But you know what it gives us the ability to do is actually streamline that and give it more power to be able to produce the information quickly, and to be able to give people the information they need at their fingertips rather than having to wait a week to get the information back. So, you know, in this world, we're bringing ourselves up to that on-demand now position.
Thank you very much for that, Fee and Kirsty. Now I think it's time for us to go to the Q&A. So we have a few questions through the Q&A, so we'll just dive into that. I think we have about 15 minutes for that. I think the first one was probably for Fee. You have the Elastic database in the public cloud and the Oracle database in your own data center. I guess the first part is, how are you keeping them in sync? And then the second part is, how much of an overhead is it performing all the indexing?
That's a really good question, Ben. So we are keeping them. So we had a design around using an event-driven platform. We threw some ideas around about Apache Kafka and those types of tools, and eventually we decided that we didn't have enough time to sit down and properly reevaluate what that would mean, and we brought in a more tactical solution around polling the Oracle data source and taking timestamp changes and pushing that up. So it's kind of getting the same effect, but just not as cool and sexy. So the indexing is an interesting side of it. So initially, the initial indexing of getting all the stuff that we already had out of Oracle and into some data structures that we could use for Elastic, it took around about an hour to do and to actually get that all inserted. So not horrendous, given the fact that there's like 20-30 years worth of data in there. And so the subsequent data deltas that we're pushing up take like less than a second, milliseconds to suck out, re-index, and then push back up into Elasticsearch.
Excellent, thank you for that. Second one is a good one. What was the one biggest challenge that you faced? I suppose that's to both of you.
For me, let's see. I suppose the biggest single challenge is it comes in 2 parts. One is about investment in redeveloping classic or legacy systems, and that's around you know, that investment from, whether you're in public sector or private sector, that's investment from your stakeholders or your shareholders or your exec board to actually understand why you would want to do that on a regular basis, or you know, where you've had a period of austerity, to then be able to really express what those benefits are in terms of a business. So one of the big challenges I have is on that side of it, and I think learning from other areas like Sage and how they adopted a product management approach has really helped me to be able to articulate some of that thinking. And I think the other side of it is it literally is around hearts and minds. So making sure you stay connected and making sure you have that iterative conversation. The tech stuff can happen. We fall down rabbit holes all the time with tech stuff, and we climb back out. We learn so much along the way. But if you lose the engagement with people, then you've failed, and you will fail to deliver. And it has been a challenge for everybody involved to make sure that we are understanding and talking the same language. And that's mainly just because when you're talking about a product that's so old, and that people have loved and nurtured and taken care of for such a long time, to actually say, well, your baby's a bit ugly and I want to redevelop the baby, isn't what they want to hear. So I think that those are the two elements I would probably say. A business might say something different, but
what about you, Fee?
So for me, I think the biggest problem, and we amazingly overcame this, actually, was this project was done literally as the whole lockdown for COVID-19 started. Yeah, we forgot about all of that.
So that's just normal now, isn't it?
I know, but it was, so I onboarded onto a new project and I had to do all that, the architecture side of things. So they're going around and drawing the same set of boxes and lines with lots of different stakeholder groups, and that was an interesting experience. But then the whole part where you're delivering it, so doing good things like pair programming and stuff like that with the development team, that we found some really good ways to actually do that, and so we didn't miss out on it from that respect. But yeah, like the whole, I can't just go and sit on somebody's desk and make them answer my question was that was a difficult challenge.
Actually, it's strange to remember that was new at the time, wasn't it?
Yes, I'd completely forgotten about that. It's amazing how quickly you just adapt, isn't it, to stuff?
Yeah, totally. Okay, thanks both for this one. The next one, I know we touched on this quite a bit in the talk, but can you tell me a bit more about how user research on APIs worked?
Yeah, I think we alluded to it quite a bit throughout the presentation, but it literally is exactly the same techniques and standards as what our user researchers would use with a user interface that they were doing some work around. So they went out and did the whole pain points gathering around, obviously not this platform, but so not the API side of things, but so going out and speaking to the users that were interacting with the database directly and finding out what they found problem with that. And so that brought out all sorts of interesting curiosities around how the data was structured and how the language was in the database. So that was really good. And then there's the whole bit around taking back out what you've done to users. So we would do some rapid prototyping of what the API endpoints would look like based on what had come out of previous user research sessions, and they would be taken back, and it would be a case of same sort of things like, what do you think this data point means? Do you understand what these different attributes all are that are coming back in the JSON? What do you not understand? And that I think was really, really powerful, because we ended up with a language that was just so inclusive for internal and external users by the end of it.
Okay, thank you for that. I think we have another one on sort of on the back of the theme of remote working. So do you have any advice on how to run workshop style scoping meetings remotely?
Yes, well, maybe it's not advice, but tools. So we used Miro a lot. So you know how you have the whole whiteboards and you've got your post-it notes. And so we did a lot of post-it noting on Miro whiteboards, and also a lot of pair drawing of, or group drawing of what we thought things looked like as well. So it wasn't massively different to how we would run just a face-to-face workshop, but I don't think we could have done it without things like Miro as well.
Just to add to that, I think you know, the ceremonies and stand-ups and all of that are all pretty much, it's just virtual instead. I think that, you know, Fiona touched on the biggest challenge around not being able to plonk yourself down on the seat next to somebody. But, you know, in some of the other projects that we've worked on, where you're having to maybe keep an open channel, and actually what we've done is we've set up a Teams meeting and kept it as an open channel, and known that, say, for example, the user research or the user experience would be there, the developers would come in at various points and ask questions, or the developers would be there cracking on with stuff, and then, you know, the user researchers or the UX would come in and provide some further feedback. And because they know that channel is open all the time, there's going to be somebody there, it's kind of more like a drop in, drop out, and it emulated that sitting beside somebody or dropping down past their desk. I have to say, you have to invest a lot more in that virtual world. So it is more constant, shorter, snappier conversations, and you're having to cycle through it. But it seems to work, and yeah, we've learned a lot, and now we just do it as normal.
Excellent. Well, thanks both. I think that's it for the questions that have been presented. So if there's no more from anyone else, thanks everyone for joining, and thanks you two very much for the talk.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.